Edition of Hannity, Countdown to the Election. I'm Tammy Bruce, in tonight for Sean. After 4 very long days, the Democratic National Convention has finally, mercifully, come to an end. Last night, Joe Biden capped off the week with a mostly forgettable speech, short on policy details, but full of negative platitudes against President Trump and the state of our country today. President Trump, however, responded. Take a look at this.
Joe Biden grimly declared a season of American darkness. And yet, look at what we've accomplished. Until the plague came in, look at what we've accomplished. And now we're doing it again. Where Joe Biden sees American darkness, I see American greatness. We've seen heroic doctors and nurses racing into action to save lives. We've seen first responders helping strangers in need. We've seen the passage of historic legislation to save 50 million American jobs. We've mobilized American industry like never before. It's time to reject the anger and the hate of the Democrat Party. We have the biggest election coming up of our lifetime.
President Trump also fiercely criticized what Joe Biden conveniently left out of his remarks. Watch this.
But the biggest part of last night's speech was what Joe Biden didn't talk about. He didn't talk about law enforcement. He didn't talk about bringing safety to Democrat-run cities that are totally out of control and they have no clue. China was never mentioned in any way, shape, or form. China will own our country if he gets elected. They will own our country, and we're not going to let that happen.
Yeah, boy, what a difference in attitude there. So ultimately, Biden was so short on details because the radical Democratic agenda is downright frightening. As former Governor Chris Christie remarked, it scares the bejesus out of people. Watch this.
You didn't hear any specifics last night.
None.
For Joe Biden. And the reason for that is because his specifics would scare the bejesus out of America. And he knows it. It's a crazy left-wing liberal agenda that he has been captive of now, and he gave into in order to get the nomination, and that he will pursue if he's elected.
Joining us now with reaction is American Conservative Union Chairman Matt Schlapp and Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt. Guys, thank you so much for joining me tonight. You know, it is nice that the convention is over, even though President Trump got this really nice bump during the convention, which was, of course, interesting in and of itself. But, Matt, let me start with you. You know, when we talk about their lack of a willingness to talk about policy details, isn't it possible that they've been promising both the left and their so-called pragmatic moderates the same thing, that they're both in charge and that they can't talk about details because it would offend or frighten their part of their own base? Matt?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Tammy, which is, if you look at the Socialist Manifesto that Bernie Sanders and AOC negotiated with Biden, it's the most extreme policy document that we've ever seen in politics. And if it got the, if it got the sunshine that it deserves, people would be appalled. Chris Christie says they would scare the bejesus out of people. They're actually not really even into bejesus at all. If you look at what their policies would do for an economic recovery, you can't raise taxes on everybody in this country and also say you're going to bring the economy back. You can't say you're going to take all of those Obama-era regulations that Trump has taken off the economy to stop domestic energy production, to allow small businesses to prosper. If you put those all back on the economy, there's no way we're going to have a recovery because America won't become competitive again. Yeah. If America isn't competitive, that helps China and our economic adversaries overseas. And how about this, Tammy? Does it make any sense to make nuns pay for the abortions in this country? Can't we have some kind of zone of First Amendment freedom to practice your religion or to not practice your religion? What is wrong with these radicalized socialist Democrats? I tell you what, I think if the American people know more, they will vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, look, this is not, I think, unknown to the American people, Charlie, in that This is the Obama-Biden administration was not so long ago. We know what they did. We know what a disaster it was. Biden's been in for 47 years in government. We know the difference Donald Trump has brought forward. We know what's happened now with China and the China virus. Charlie, do you really think that the American people can be gaslit in this way, that they don't want answers or don't want specifics? How long can Joe Biden get away with this?
Yeah, I have a real hard time thinking that the American voters are not on to this. Voters are very smart. They're much smarter than I think Washington politicians ever give them credit for being. It's a real strange little gambit that Joe Biden is trying to play here. On the one hand, he's talking about how racist America is, how awful America is, how unfair America is. And then on the other hand, he has to acknowledge, which you just pointed out, which is that he's been part of the problem in Washington for 47 years. And if America is this horrible place, he's never done anything to fix any of it. And 8 of those years, he was the #2 guy in the White House. So whatever it is that he's attacking Donald Trump for, he has to take some credit for that himself, which is why really all of this is just political. It's all nonsense. You know, when Barack Obama on the night that he spoke said that when he blamed Donald Trump for 170,000 deaths in America because of the Wuhan plague, I thought to myself, wow, Barack Obama doesn't want Joe Biden to win, because you would never say that if you wanted a politician to win. And then Joe Biden turns around and says it himself. It's such a nasty line of attack, and it's so hopeless, and it's so dishonest. And I think the American people realize that. In fact, there's no doubt in my mind that the American people realize how dishonest that is.
Well, it's dishonest, but also I think, Matt, it can be confusing. If you think that America is racist, you're talking about Americans being racist, you're talking about this country being a pit that cannot be saved, then what is it exactly that is worth saving? He seems to be contradicting himself in his own commentary about the nation.
This is the problem with systemic racism. It's this term they throw out there, but it's an indictment of the entire American experience. Because what systematic racism means, Tammy, and you know this, it means that I can't choose to be virtuous in my treatment of other human beings because the system is so bad that I'm just going to get caught up in the rottenness of the system, so that a young black man or a person of color can't rise above their problems in life because the system is so rotten. It makes people of color not try as they should and not feel hope, and it makes white people feel like no matter what they do, they're just rotten and they stink. And that is exactly the opposite of what America believes.
It's the ultimate disaster, because what you're doing is you're condemning everyone immediately, that there is no hope. You know, gone is the hope and change dynamic of Barack Obama. With Joe Biden, everything is already lost, which Americans, we reject this. It certainly is not the American way, and it's not the nature of how we view our future. And that it will be interesting. Gambit, as you said, Charlie, is an interesting way to put it. We'll see. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Matt Schlapp, Charlie Hurt, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Now, unlike Joe Biden, President Trump will actually visit another state during his convention. On Monday, as the RNC formally kicks off, the president will head north to North Carolina to visit local farmers. And joining us now with a preview of next week's events is RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. Ronna, welcome aboard. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
Well, you've been very busy. You've been very steady. You've been a great voice during this process, because there are different messages, clearly. The Democrat message is that everything is lost. America is a hellscape, that we can't make any difference for it. It's done. And then you've got President Trump, who is reminding us about the American ideal, about what we want for the future, about the power of the American sensibility. What can we actually expect now for this next week coming up? What will the approach of the president be?
Well, I think your point at the beginning was exactly right. Donald Trump's going to be in North Carolina on Monday. Donald Trump was also in Wisconsin, the state where Joe Biden had his convention that he never showed up to, and President Trump continues to travel this country and bring messages of hope and talk about the greatness of America throughout the country. So in our convention, you're going to see this aspirational message. The president is going to put forward a plan for the next 4 years, but he's also going to talk about how his policies have directly affected real people. It's going to be the American story, not the Hollywood script and fiction that was put forward by the Democrats this past week.
You know, what I do love about him, and I think one of the many reasons why he won in 2016 was we saw him fall in love with the country through the campaign. I don't know what he thought maybe at the beginning of the campaign, but when he began to meet us, he realized the potential in who we were and that we were worth saving. And we recognized that as well, even though we'd been told for a number of years prior through the Obama-Biden administration that we weren't really worth saving. And he, you know, his travel to states, I think this speaks to that as well, recognizing the value and the importance of the states as they exist versus an overarching federal response to things. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. The president loves this country, but more importantly, he loves the people of this country. And he ran because of those people who didn't have a voice in Washington, that didn't have lobbyists, that weren't the elite from the coasts, that were the voices from Hollywood or big tech. He ran for the farmer, for that blue-collar worker on the line in Michigan. He ran for the everyday man who didn't have a voice in Washington, and he said, you deserve better. You deserve better from your politicians. I'm going to go drain the swamp, and I'm going to do things better. And he has, with deregulation and cutting taxes and policies that have unleashed our energy independence and made people's lives better across the country. Democrats were so dishonest in their convention, talking about the Obama-Biden administration and all the things they did to hurt our country. Yeah. Donald Trump has brought us back, and he's going to do it again after this pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's clear. He kept promises. At the same time, of course, he also made Republicans mad on occasion. I think the RNC is learning a bit when it comes to the nature of how to approach the American people outside of that beltway, and it's making all of us better. Ronna, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I appreciate it. Now,
thanks for having me.
Coming up, the Democrats. My pleasure. The Democrats this week at their convention ignored completely the lawlessness plaguing liberal cities across this country. Emily Campagno, Leo Terrell, and Austin Goolsbee join us next as this special edition of Hannity continues. Welcome back to this special edition of Hannity. Unsurprisingly, the Democrats completely ignored the lawlessness plaguing liberal cities at their convention this week as we saw brutality continue to unfold in our streets. A vicious attack on a truck driver in Portland was captured on video Sunday night. The prime suspect in that case, Marquise Love, surrendered to the police. Here is what he had to say.
I don't want to defund police departments. I think they need more help. They need more assistance. We have to make it clear that this is about protecting neighborhoods, protecting people, everybody across the board. So the only guy that actually put in a bill to actually defund the police is Donald Trump.
Well, that's a little bit of a shift. Oh, yeah, Joe? Then why did the National Association of Police Organizations endorse Trump after they backed you and Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012? And let's not forget that Biden previously said that he would be willing to, quote, redistribute funds away from police departments, saying that police have become the enemy, while Kamala praised the defunding of the LAPD. So why is, and you saw her nodding there as he was talking, so why is Biden ignoring the crime wave and chaos in America's major cities? Well, joining me now with a reaction, attorney and Fox News contributor Emily Campagno, civil rights attorney, a man with very little to say, Leo Terrell, and former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors to President Obama, Austin Goolsbee. Everybody, welcome aboard. Thanks for joining me tonight. I appreciate it. Now, let me start, actually, Austin, with you. You know, I've heard Barack Obama make specific statements that what is happening now, and even in violence that was occurring during his administration, was not the way to go, that this was not acceptable, that things had to be done differently. And yet, not only at the convention, but in general, we have not heard leading Democrats in the party condemn what's been going on, except for that little bit about defunding the police, when the messaging prior to that had been the opposite. Are they realizing now it's a bigger problem than they thought? Are they looking at polls? Why suddenly the shift?
Well, I don't know that there was a shift. I mean, you started by trying to portray that as a partisan thing. I would point out that 8 of the 10 highest violent crime rates are red states. And if you take the reddest city in America, it's Oklahoma City, it has the same population as Portland, Oregon, and its murder rate is double that in Portland. Crime is a bad issue. I think the Democrats were more focused on the lawlessness coming out of the White House than they were on general lawlessness or the crime rate.
Well, that's a little bit of a jog. Americans see what's going on, Emily, throughout the country. Mostly, if it's blue states, they see Portland, certainly. They see Seattle. It's New York. We see Chicago. It is not red states. You've got Texas, but you've got Austin, a blue city. Regardless, we've got at least President Trump taking action against that with Operation Legend, being very, very aggressive in that regard. But the Democrats seem to be silent or passive. Emily, can they continue being silent on the violence that's going on?
Well, if they do so, it will be with the consequence that they will lose votes in November. And to respond to Austin's points, that's actually aptly said, in that the focus indeed is on the federal government, but to the point where it's missing the voter. We absolutely understand that we are being ignored, all of us in these cities, especially those that are being rocked by violence. And I don't understand why there's an inability to acknowledge that there can be a zero tolerance for violence, and also a commitment to amplification of black voices, and also to commitment.
Well, and Leo, it's also, we think about the issue of law and order versus simply safety. Regardless of who you are, if you live in an urban area, if you live in the suburbs, regardless of your complexion, your sex, sexual orientation, whatever, this is now an issue of safety. Are you going to be safe in your own city? And can there be law enforcement, and can they be empowered? Leo, you and I come from the same general area in Los Angeles. And, you know, people are afraid everywhere now. What would you say, being from the West Coast, we know what's going on here on the East Coast, what's happened to Los Angeles and the nature of Los Angelinos responding to mayhem in general that's unfolding everywhere?
Well, the same thing is happening in all these Democratic cities, Los Angeles, Portland, and Seattle. And Austin, for you to bring up Oklahoma City, that's just you're trying to use smoke and mirrors. Let's be very clear. The Democrats during the convention didn't say one thing about the chaos in those cities. Why? Because they're basically supporting Black Lives Matter. Austin, Black Lives Matter? Which Black lives? Black when there's a police officer, or is there a black-on-black crime in Chicago? Or what about the police officer, David Dorn? For Austin to come in here and talk about Oklahoma City and not talk about the chaos. The Democrats cannot talk about crime in these cities because they're run by Democratic mayors. And the thing that's so amazing about it, they play the race card throughout that entire convention. Isn't it amazing, Austin? And I hope you answer my question, is that Chicago is run by black people, black police chiefs, and they call racism. So all the Democratic convention try to do is talk about racism in Democratic cities and ignore the crime in Democratic cities. One last point. President Trump offered help to these Democratic cities, but Austin didn't want anything to do with it. Austin, answer my question. Let's not talk about Oklahoma. Talk about Chicago, Seattle, and Washington. Please.
Austin, go for it. What do you have to say?
Well, you had quite a few questions in there, and so let me try to address some of them. I still don't see how you get away from the fact that 8 of the 10 most violent crime states in the country are red states. That is a problem that we must... That is a problem that we must address across partisan lines. Now, in Portland, the president sent in federal agents and caused violent crime.
To protect a federal building. 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 To protect a federal building.
It wasn't just to protect a federal building. That was the problem.
Answer a question.
Leo and Austin, gentlemen.
I'm not playing games.
I beg your pardon, just a minute. No, just about, gentlemen, thank you very much. Bottom line is, when the federal agents were withdrawn, the violence continued, and it continued against local law enforcement, completely debunking the myth that the federal agents were somehow responsible for the violence in Portland. That's already been debunked. We've been seeing now, weeks later, that they're now going after local law enforcement. So, gentlemen, thank you. Obviously, this is something that the Democrats don't want to discuss because it deals with policy, liberal attitudes, and restrictions on police and what it is they're able to do, and blaming, of course. Now, coming up, thank you, all of you. Appreciate it. Coming up, the liberal media could not contain their excitement this week. And last night, they were fawning over Joe Biden's remarks. We'll play you the tape as this special edition of Hannity continues. To this special edition of Hannity now. After Joe Biden last night showed he could read a teleprompter without any disastrous blunders, the mob in the media immediately proclaimed it a momentous achievement, all while they worked overtime to pretend that this week's DNC was anything but a depressing debacle. Here's just a small sample from CNN. Take a look.
We were prepared for it to be a terrible speech. As long as he didn't embarrass himself, we were going to come out here and praise it. You don't have to make nothing up tonight. Joe Biden did that thing.
I am the hardcore, fiercest partisan here. I am just like, if I could jump out of the chair, I mean, this is the best night for Joe Biden ever.
Wow, it's like the toddler just took a step, isn't it? Yes, and the Washington Post took things a step further with their theater critic calling the virtual DNC, quote, award-worthy television. But, of course, everything they all do is always worthy of an award, isn't it? Now, Biden's adoring fans in the press will defend him at all costs, even as he makes it clear he's not interested in taking any of their questions. So ask yourself, why is that? Much of the media is refusing to critically cover Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Why is it that they ignore the violent crime and rioting plaguing America's Democrat-run cities? And why is it that they downplay the historic achievements under President Trump, like the recent UAE-Israeli peace deal, remarkable achievement? And why is it that they continue to ignore Joe Biden's decades of failure inside the Washington swamp? It's because the mob in the media are nothing more than an arm of the Democratic Party, reciting the same talking points, repeating the same fake news narratives, and living in the same echo chamber. But the good news is, you get the final say, because in 74 days, we will vote in the most important choice election of our lifetime, and you have the opportunity to shock the world again. Now, joining me now for a reaction, media reporter for The Hill, Joe Concha, and Trump 2020 Director of Communications, Aaron Perini. Welcome aboard to both of you. Thanks for joining me tonight. Very busy week,
hey,
right? We kind of knew what would happen with the media. And, Joe, of course, you've been a very busy guy as we lead into this. Now, we also know what to expect coming up next week, which will be that the sky is falling and everything is awful. How are we going to be able to look at the media? And is there going to be any point where we can take them seriously going into the RNC next week?
Well, you had a great headline on there, Tammy, as far as the Washington Post calling it award-winning television. I like to look at numbers a lot. I'm a numbers guy. And the bottom line is that Joe Biden's acceptance speech was viewed by 21.8 million people. And you say, oh, wow, that's a pretty good number, until you put that number into context. 21.8 million for Biden is 21% lower than Hillary Clinton's acceptance speech in 2016, nearly 40% lower than President Trump's acceptance speech in the 2016 RNC. So then you say, okay, well, a lot more people are watching streaming and they're watching on their phones. All right, let's use a 2020 to 2020 apples to apples comparison. The president's State of the Union address, pre-pandemic, mind you, when people could actually go out, 37 million people watched, compared to Joe Biden's about 22 million, a $15 million viewer difference. That's what we're seeing here. And again, we're in a pandemic. Huge. People are at home, not a lot of options. And then you look at the substance of the Biden speech. Again, 24 minutes in a teleprompter, the shortest speech, by the way, that we've seen since Walter Mondale in 1984. And if the theme is, I'm a decent man, look, we're not voting for a priest. We're voting for a president. And this was a convention of grievances, an airing of grievances, a Festivus, and therefore a show about nothing. So I would imagine next week, Trump 2020, Republicans are looking at this and saying, OK, we need a message with teeth with it, in drawing a contrast between the Democrats and Republicans, Biden and Trump. Democrats will raise taxes, and there'll be anarchy in our streets if we continue to allow this ticket to actually get to the White House. We will do the opposite, keep taxes low, and address the anarchy in our streets. That's what the Trump campaign hopes to draw in terms of a contrast when we get to Monday.
Okay. All right. And, you know, that's a very good example, because really the viewers, in a way, the American people, Aaron, are really the deciders, right? They're going to watch something that makes them hopeful, that gives them a sense of why one goes on living, why you take that next step, why the next day should matter. And it's not going to be very difficult for the president to come up with a message that's hopeful. That seems to be his foundational premise from the start.
I mean, that's absolutely right. You heard the president say it today, and I think it was just such a poignant line where Joe Biden sees American darkness, he sees American greatness, and that's just President Trump. But you'll certainly hear from him coming up next week as he re-accepts the nomination to lead the Republican Party and America for 4 more years. The contrast is clear. Joe Biden took a dark and divisive tone, and it was really hard to tell where the media ends and Democrats begin, with all of their tripping over themselves, applauding the bare minimum participation trophy effort that Joe Biden gave, reading a teleprompter speech. Congratulations, Joe, you managed to do it. But let's look at the facts here. He was dark and he was dismissive, and he didn't talk about what's actually going on in this country, the greatness achieved under President Trump. He had to try to veil that. He couldn't even respect the office. He called him the occupant of the office. Hey, friendly reminder, Joe, there's a big difference between you and President Donald J. Trump, and it's not just the fact that the president is Donald J. Trump as a direct rebuke of the Obama-Biden administration. It's that America has great leadership with President Trump, something Joe Biden has never done in his 47 years in the swamp.
Yeah, I think Kellyanne Conway noted the difference between 47 months with President Trump versus 47 years with Joe Biden. The American people obviously will decide, and we're looking forward to that, certainly. Aaron, Joe, thanks for joining me tonight. Now, up next. Last night, Joe Biden said, if elected, he will institute a national mask mandate. Plus, he's now vowing to shut down the country again. What a surprise. If necessary, because, of course, of COVID. Congressman Steve Scalise and Andy Biggs join us next. Stay right there.